Hi, my name is Johanna Björkell, and I'm a researcher and university lecturer at Åbo Akademi University. And with me today, I have a brilliant postdoc researcher from Umeå University, Annika Wiklund-Engblom. And would you please shortly introduce yourself?
Well, I'm originally from Swedish-speaking parts of Finland, but I work in Umeå right now. But I've been researching digital learning since I started in IT-pedagogue education in 2001, so around that time.
You've been at it for a long time.
Yes. And I've been a distance student and distance researcher, so I've done it, from all sides and directions. So, yeah.
Excellent. Today, we're here to talk about self-regulation in terms of digital media and education. And you've been doing quite some extensive research on that. So would you mind telling the viewers what is self-regulation and what does it have to do with digital media?
Well, I can frame it in an example of my own research. I looked for my dissertation, I looked at how people are learning when they have to be alone with a screen and learn something on their own. And the tool that they have to complete something is their own self-regulation. How can I adjust my own learning to know what to do, when to do, how to do in terms of being my own guide in relation to digital media. So if and when we are introducing digital media to a learning situation, you will have to support learners in becoming more self-regulated, and that is what I used to use a metaphor, driving a car, have to know how to manipulate the car in order to move forward, and that's your self-regulation. So you're the driver of your own learning in that sense.
Is that different from kind of in real life learning? If I'm a teacher in a classroom and if I introduce digital media, is there a difference in the self-regulation for the student in that term?
Well, for any kind of learning, you have to be self-regulated in some sense. But if a teacher is there, the teacher often can see that, now I see that this student needs help. Like a mathematician teacher that I was interviewing, he said, yeah, I can read their body language and know that I have to go to that student and ask, do you need help now? But if you're alone behind a screen, or if you have distance students, you won't be able to read their body language in the same way. You have to develop different clues to sort of guide them to become self-regulated. And more responsibilities put on the students to handle difficulties themselves and know when there are difficulties and how to deal with them.
As an IT pedagogue, I usually tell my teachers that do remember whenever you put a digital device in front of students, you leave them alone. And so you have to kind of help them for when they are alone, as in what are they able to do and what have you taught them that they're supposed to do if things go wrong or if it feels hard or if they encountered various problems. So kind of being there as a teacher without being there when the student actually needs it.
And I think it's a lot about self-awareness actually, and like John Hattie talks about the visible learning. If a student can see their own learning, they can also see the problems when there are some problems. So about making somebody self-regulated, also about visualizing their learning process and discussing learning, teaching them how to see their own learning and in relation to the tools. And I call this really strange. It's actually about meta-learning 2.0, but I call it design-based epistemic meta-reflection, and that's
good listeners.
We will put that on the screen so you can see it. But I can explain it. It's the design-based is about meeting the digital interface. So whatever is designed there, it's based. Your learning situation is based on the design, and you have to be aware of how that design can be a tool for your own benefit. And then the epistemic is about your knowledge about how to create knowledge. So you can see your own learning process and be aware of how do I think in relation to this subject, for instance. This is also something that Entwistle talks about. It's not about teaching as much content as possible. It's about teaching somebody how to think in a certain subject and visualizing that process so they can become expert thinkers and learners. And then the meta-reflection is about being able to see it from different perspectives. It's not only about the cognition, it's also about my emotions in relation to the context, the digital, the social, the my own meaning making in relation to what's happening. Yeah, and the social part is very big thing about, I think, self-regulation, because you're always in relation to somebody else, and even if you're in a distance learning situation where you sit on a distance and the rest they are maybe somewhere else, you always relate to them in some sense, and sort of know that there are people out there, and you might become shy and oh, I don't want to speak in front of these, I don't know who's listening to me, and you might become feeling unsafe and vulnerable.
Yeah.
So you don't maybe express yourself in the same way.
Yeah.
If you're on camera, for instance.
In a practical sense, I usually tell my students the importance of actually adding their pictures whenever there is some kind of a distance study thing, and that's not for you yourself, but it's for your fellow students, so they can know who they are relating to.
Yes.
Which means that they will be better study companions to you when they actually have a face on you. And also, if you have the possibility to start off the course with having them do kind of a video presentation of themselves, which they can then also view, not just for you as a teacher, but for them.
Create connection. It's like if you can laugh together, that's even better. Yeah. Because then you're sort of creating this relaxed atmosphere where you can be yourself, and it's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes, and it's all about when it's in a distance situation. I find that the psychological safety, to create a psychologically safe space, it's a key for the learning process, more or less. And especially if you have to do with young students, their brain is much more vulnerable to shame and being exposed to somebody, and their hormones will run havoc if they're exposed to something that feels unsafe, much more than adults are. And also when it comes to self-regulation, the difference when you look at adult learners and young learners, self-regulation is what differs them, because they have not developed the self-regulatory tools yet.
Oh, yeah.
Like the older we get, the more we develop.
Your background is actually as a developmental psychologist, right?
Yes.
How do you see then, if we're talking about students then from the age of 6 up to the age of 18, let's say like the basic school system in Finland, how would you look at their differences in terms of, okay, I'm a teacher and I'm creating some kind of a digital aspect into my regular teaching, so it's not distance, but it's something that we're doing perhaps as a homework or perhaps as a part of the actual class. How would you then, I don't know, use like your knowledge about how they have developed? What would you place in that?
Well, of course, the younger the student, the more you have to be careful that you have them on the wagon, so to speak, and know that they're understanding. They can take less responsibility for their own learning the younger they are. But I've witnessed a researcher, Annika Wiklund-Engblom, her name is, and I was very amazed when she described her research, and she had like, I can't remember exactly, but it was like lower levels in school, like maybe 8, 9, 10 years old or something like that. And she had used digital or research when they were using like Google Docs, for collaborative writing and giving feedback to each other when they were doing writing assignments. And she had filmed these students, and when I listened to how they talked about their learning, I was amazed because they were using like terminology that researcher would be, using in relation to their own learning process. So I couldn't help myself but ask, how can these students be so
knowledgeable?
Yes, in describing their learning process and discussing it. And she said, well, that was a long process. They were teaching them how to reflect on their own learning process in relation to these tools, and that's actually exactly what I mean when I say design-based epistemic meta-reflection, because you can talk about your own learning in relation to what the tool does for your learning process. So Google Docs will help me do this, and we were giving feedback, and then I understood this, and this helped me there, and I could see this, like that.
As a subject teacher, that sounds very advanced for like lower level students.
Oh yes, I was amazed. But I mean, to your questions, what's the difference between having young students to the upper levels? The difference, I guess, is the responsibility that you have to. But I don't think you cannot teach younger children to use digital media in the same way. But you have to be very careful to be the guide on the side to assist them in the process of looking at their own learning process. I've my colleagues in Umeå have looked at one-to-one iPads implementation in classrooms, for instance, and this has been like a Nordic study, and in the Swedish part, one of the researchers looked at how the teachers talked about the learning process, and if that was included in the discussions in relation to the tool use and unfortunately, she didn't even see a lot of that. It was more instruction, timing and which button to push, but not a lot about reflecting on the learning process as such and discussing that with the student.
Did I learn better or worse from doing this than from using something manual, or as in between various platforms or various apps or programs?
I'm not following.
That's okay. I will help you along. I was just thinking about, in terms of her not hearing them talk about that, like talk about the learning in itself. Was that in relationship? I mean, in your opinion, what would have been the better thing? Would it have been better if they talked about, okay, so here is the content, here are the instructions on how we're using this. We are using an iPad and we're using the app iMovie, for instance. So how do you feel as a student that you learned better? Did you learn better when we were discussing amongst ourselves the kind of content and the assignment, or did you learn more while you were doing? Was that the kind of discussion that she would have wanted to see more of, or?
Well, this was based on classroom observations, and what she saw was that.
Which means that she doesn't interact with them.
No. She's observing students and teachers and their interaction, and to see how is this implementation done, and what can we learn from it. I mean, these were teachers that were really new in implementing tablets, so I mean, we're all guinea pigs, I think, in the digital learning process of implementation. And what was lacking was the discussion around the students' learning process that was going on. It was more about, the technical, the timing of it, the frame of, everything around, instructions. Yeah. And not about making the students see their own learning in relation to what was going on. So that's what I call meta learning 2.0, to sort of learn about your own learning process within this digital frame, and I think that's where we need to go. It's been a lot about the technical, digital competence and all of that, and I think we have to move beyond the technical dimension. And
is the following aspect then a social relational competence?
Yes, that's very much one part of it as well. I've been interviewing teachers in the upper secondary school, for instance, and I've stopped around the social dimension and what I call a digital relational competence. If you talk about digital competence, I think that's not enough. We have to understand how it impacts the social relations and the communication and all of that, and that's where the psychological safety also comes in. And I think it's very important to have that discussion with the students and sort of expose the emotions that are related to being like a distance students, for instance.
Yeah. Myself, I'm doing a distance course at the moment, and it started off with an introductory session that was on on the premises, face-to-face teaching for 3 hours, but everyone couldn't attend the first session. And I mean, research shows that that first session, if you have the possibility to, in an online course, have like a first on-site situation, do that, because that is your chance as a teacher to create the psychological safety in a much more profound way than you can online. And I realize now, when the course is on its way, we've just done, we're on module 1 out of 5, that those students that did not attend from the beginning, I really don't want to say that I've put them in a bad situation, but that they're in a bad situation, in a sense that I truly hope and I wish, and I've been trying to tell them so, that please do meet with your actual physical study group, since they are on the same location and have the possibility to do that. But I do think, and especially if they have new members, and I find that, you know, how could I as a teacher take more responsibility, I think, for that situation? How could I, in terms of self-regulation, help them to get into that psychological safer zone, the ones that did not attend?
From a didactical perspective, as a teacher, you have to be very aware of that any sort of difference between how people meet and connect will create inequality. Okay. So if you have students in the classroom and you have distance students at the same time watching from a video, this will create inequality. Okay. And inequality will affect the connection you have, and the connection will affect how you can work together. And of course, the psychological safety as well. And I recently heard a researcher say that creating feelings of safety is not about removing the threat, or that the threat is not there.
Ooh, that's interesting.
It's about creating connection. So it doesn't matter, threat is not there or not, it doesn't matter, but you're feeling safe when you can create a connection to somebody. Okay. And how do you do, like you, for instance, you mentioned the picture. I think that's very, very important to create the feeling of I can see somebody. And I also think it's a very cognitive thing, that if you discuss with somebody on, like for instance, a forum, and there's no picture, your brain will not remember it in the same way, because there's no face to. We're so programmed from evolution to see a face and connect the face to something in relation. So wow. Communication is all about the relationship with somebody, and if there's no face, the relationship will be different, and your attachment or emotions to it will be different.
Ooh, and that's interesting also from the point of, that is interesting from the student to student perspective, but it's also interesting for me, because I also feel that when I accept assignments online and there's not a face attached to it, then I have a hard time. Then on the other hand, we have the fact that since I also work with equality stuff and inequality stuff, or issues that happen in education, it's interesting to see, of course, that as teachers we form different types of quality relationships in the classroom. I mean, with our students. You relate to me excellently, and I find you a good student, and then we have a really great relationship. While someone who's struggling, perhaps, I, as a teacher, can kind of shut out a little bit, because I feel it threatens my
That's all about self-awareness.
Yeah, that threatens my competence, or
Yeah.
threatens the fact that I feel shame or something as a teacher, that I'm not able to reach you in the same way, which kind of makes our relationship suffer in a sense. So I mean, the inequality starts in the face-to-face relationship, but the inequality is even more there when the face is stripped away. So I, as a teacher, when I get assignments, I find it harder to actually give relevant feedback, I think. And this is about my self-knowledge when I don't have a face associated to whomever is sending in the assignment.
From being a distance student myself and having been teaching a teacher at distance courses, this is something that has really made me think a lot about the digital relational competence, and I think it's very important to discuss this thing with your students and make them aware of how they connect to others in a course, and that it's that they need to do it. It's not something that is coming, by itself. Like in a classroom, you see everybody. Nobody's sitting with a bag over their head. That would be very difficult to connect to that person.
A study that they did, I think in 2013, within the higher education students in Finland, or was it? No, but it was Finland only. It wasn't the Nordic countries, it was in Finland. And they came to the conclusion that for higher education students, 40% of them feel alone in the day-to-day studies when they actually attend class, because also the studies are set up that way that it's kind of a one-way thing, where the teacher comes in and lectures to them and then walks away, and they don't perhaps, like in all courses, get to interact so very much. And then in higher education, we're moving more and more toward online studies in various forms, which in some aspects are really good and in some aspects are perhaps really bad. Especially in terms of these feelings of being alone.
Yeah. But I think lectures, they have their place still. I mean, it's not like, it's a bad thing, but we don't only want that. And when we're in the process of making everything digital, and we really have to be careful also to think of how do we transfer that sort of way of teaching to a digital medium, and what's the added value of doing something like that. And I think when you introduce digital tools, you yourself as a teacher have to become really didactically aware of what you're doing. If you're just used to, getting up and standing in front of a class and then you talk your research and your knowledge and that's that, and you walk away. If you're then having to do it in an online, you have to stop and think, and why am I doing this? How can I make them learn better? It's all about the questions. How, why, when, with whom?
The classical didactical questions.
Yes, and you have to assess everything you're doing.
Yeah.
And really ask why, because you can't just throw it in there and make it digital without reflection.
We did this as an example when we were introducing a blog as a means for teacher students to write their practice reports, their pre-service reports, depending on what you term it. And the interesting part there was that we realized that when we were asking them, the students, the teacher students, to add their videos, like presentation videos, that we couldn't just ask them to present themselves. We had 5 questions that they were supposed to answer, very kind of pedagogically normal questions. What's your view on learning? What's your view on students? What is your pedagogical philosophy? And so forth. And we realized that this is very unfair if we were 2 teachers. If we as teachers demand that they kind of put themselves out there and expose themselves vulnerably by talking about their own expressions and their own thoughts, if we don't do the same. So when we did the the instructions, we also added, so we made videos of ourselves answering the same questions as they did. So kind of modeling behavior in a sense, and also saying that we're not above this process as teachers.
Yes, and to even make it more psychologically safe for them to do it, you could maybe add something where you do a mistake.
Ooh,
so
yes.
you create the atmosphere of it's okay to make mistakes and fail a little bit,
Yeah.
and show your vulnerable sides too.
Yeah.
So yeah, but if I would have to give one advice to somebody who's going to implement digital solutions for learning, expose yourself as a student first. I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in the people I've interviewed, that when they discuss that how they did and why, and how they understood and reflected on creating digital learning. The teachers that had tried themselves to be a distance student, for instance, had a lot deeper reflections on why they had done something. And often it was in the terms of, well, when I was a student, I took that course. That was really, really bad. So I knew I couldn't do that. I had to change that. And that's about being like having a mind as also as a designer, that you're in a process of designing something, and you know what fails, and you can change it and reiterate and make it better.
Yeah.
So when you expose yourself as a guinea pig and understand the other side of being a student, then you can know what the needs are in a much better sense than if you're just a teacher and trying to do the trial and terror, as I say.
Trial and terror.
From that
that's
side,
funny.
it's much better to understand the needs from the student side first,
Yeah.
because it's such a different situation, especially if you're talking about distance students and stuff.
I still remember my first distance course that I took part of as a higher education student. At a different higher education institution. So as summer courses were offered from another higher education institution, and I was like, ooh, I could do that. And so I signed up, and they had this first introductory session that we then met up. And for me, that was a new setting. I'd never been to that university, and felt kind of second rate, and I remember being very nervous there. And there were 6 of us. I remember, students and the teacher. And the teacher, she kind of skipped the most important part. We have to remember this was in the late 90s, and she'd put up like a... She didn't really show us how to go into, it was Blackboard back then. She didn't really show us how to get into it, because she kind of assumed that we already knew how to. Since the university students that were already there, they were familiar with it. But I didn't, so I never got the first URL, like the first web address to where I was supposed to go in order to log on. So I got my login information, but there was never a mention of where. And I remember going into the university's homepage and trying to look for it, but then I just gave up. I think I spent 20, 25, 30 minutes on that, trying to find it. And I remember not daring to email or call that teacher to say that I really don't know how to get in. So I just quietly dropped out off the face of the earth, and there was never any contact, never anyone asking, you know, why are you one of the 6 students, and haven't you gotten in?
Yeah, I think from a needs perspective, I think a lot of dropouts are because of the technical dimension. I would describe this to the technical dimension of the usability of
yeah,
a
of
digital
course. But for me, it
platform.
also felt social, because I didn't feel like
Yes.
like there was a connection, and that I dared actually ask. And since I didn't have, because we didn't form any relationships there, nothing in the actual physical situation was geared toward how do you and I get to know each other if the teacher is standing over there. So there was nothing like that, and we didn't have any breaks. It was just a very short session, and bye-bye. And so I didn't have anyone to ask. It felt like. And so, yes, it was technical. I mean, it was a technical snafu, but I felt like the social.
So you actually attended a lecture?
Yes.
Okay. I thought you never got in.
No. I was there at the first session, and she showed like all these how to work the whole thing.
What was the link you couldn't get into?
Because she gave out some kind of instructions that we were supposed to go home and try for ourselves, because we weren't in a computer lab.
Okay.
So, I mean, she was just showing it on to us on a screen. I think by screenshots also, and not by actually like doing that.
And during those days, you didn't have your mobile phone to take a picture of
No.
the screen.
No. But like I remember the shame for me as a student. It was very shameful because I felt that I had failed. I never stopped to think about that. Did the teacher fail?
Yeah.
Or was there some other like systematic things that failed? But I felt like I failed, so I carried that shame around for a lot of years, and then I became an IT pedagogue myself to try to think about these things and how to avoid that students get to feel shame about things like
you
this.
have to deal with solving them as becoming professional.
Yeah, and I feel like I wasn't self-regulated back then.
Yeah, and this is also about how to design for self-regulation because it's a lot about the structure of something that where you have to go and what you have to do there, and also how to structure everything online to make it visible, so you can see the structure, and that has to be in the frame of how your mind works. I mean, we have keyboards that work according to our fingers. We have colors on the screen that work according to our eyesight and all of that. And it's the same thing with this cognitive construction and organization in your mind. You have to structure the material so your brain or somebody who has never been there before can kind of find their way and know what to do. And it can be really simple things also, how you can not only regulate where to go, but also like the emotional. Like for instance, I had one who went back and forth. I
a course or
yeah, this was an online course, and
okay.
I was watching with eye tracking, so I could see what the person was doing, and we were having an interview afterwards. So I asked him, why are you going back and forth like that? And he said, yeah, well, I was sort of feeling bored. And so I went back to check how far I had gone. And then I saw that this and this and this was checked. So I don't have much more. And then I got, the volitional control to continue. And this is also about regulation, but more like understanding yourself and having the design to support your emotional regulation, so I can finish and find meaning. Or
have you found in your research then that has self-regulation gotten better or worse in the sense of like our societal changes, Facebook, all these social medias, all this kind of our concentration ability shrinking into almost nothing?
Very nice question.
Yeah.
I think it's worse, no, but I think we have to become more aware of it and how we can control ourselves. If you only have maybe, I mean, you can misuse a book also and just read books all day. But
I used to do that.
Yeah. I mean, that's also about self-regulation. So I don't see a difference between, having a screen or having a newspaper. Like they show these photos in metros where people look scared staring at the screen. They might just as well sit and read a newspaper. I don't see the difference. But it's all about, is it becoming a problem for you? Do you have to become aware of where do I regulate myself that it's for my benefit, not for destruction? So that's also why I think we need to have a discussion much more about the tools that we use and what do they do with us. Reflect on the process of using something. Why do I use it? For instance, there's research about gaming. There is somebody who says that, well, gaming is bad and they shouldn't play that much because it's bad for the brain and blah, blah, blah.
I used to be a gamer. That's how I started becoming an IT pedagogue.
Yeah. So And I don't think it's like that. And research says that it's not that you play, it's why you play.
Yeah.
Do you play to sort of get away from other bad feelings that you have that you can't deal with, or do you play to become better, to improve yourself, to be challenged, to socialize, to sort of develop your techniques to win something? I mean, everything can go too much in one direction, but it's the question why you do something that you have to reflect. And I think that's the discussion we need to have with kids throughout, school, at home, everywhere, and adults as well.
I had a lot of questions, and we've totally gone off that question list. So I'll kind of refer back to my question. How can I then, as a teacher, teach my students to become more self-regulated? Practical tips, abstract tips. Go.
How can I teach my students? Well, the discussion for one, and I think just as I said, that you have to, when you're as a teacher, have to think much more about the didactical questions when you implement digital stuff in your classroom or have
And I
distance
feel
courses.
also talking about the didactical questions with the students, not only kind of using them yourself.
That was the next part that I was going to say. It's not only that you have to think about them, you have to discuss this much more and discuss, you might not have to reflect on how to use a pen or why to use a pen. It's quite logical. But when it comes to implementing different things, all apps aren't that good.
Nope.
And maybe you can reflect on that and what it does to your learning, if it's like a bad one or a good one. So they learn how to kind of make that judgment themselves. And maybe when they see a new app or new digital tool, they can sort of know how to reflect on it, be judgmental and kind of critical in that sense. So it's critical thinking in terms of learning. But in order to do that, you have to understand your learning process and your own position as a learner in relation to different tools.
Yeah.
So having that discussion, like this research Annika Wiklund-Engblom that I talked about, she had talked to their students about, and they were young kids, and they learned how to discuss the learning process.
Yeah. My favorite students are students with learning disabilities. I usually just call them learning challenges. It's more fun because they just have to kind of find different ways to get over or around or under them or through them or something like that. Yeah, being more creative.
We all have to be that in terms of digital tools, I think.
Yeah.
Be creative.
And sometimes I think that digital tools actually introduce some kind of learning disability for all of us. I mean, as in, if I as a student come into an online course, then how the material is set up, how the learning is measured, how the learning is presented will form a challenge for me, regardless of if I have something that would be a formal diagnosis or not. But for those students, I find that it's exceptionally more important to have them learn to talk about their own learning and see their own learning, because otherwise they can't know how to get around it, I feel.
Yeah, and research shows that if you implement digital learning in your classroom, the students that have the easy process in the first place, that are self-regulated by default, they will do better. But it will be a bigger difference between those that are not so self-regulated and maybe have learning challenges and stuff. So then it's even more important to discuss and give them the tools to become self-regulated.
Yeah. I remember for me as a teacher, something that was kind of a news flash for me, because usually we model our own teaching behavior as teachers on the teachers that we've met throughout our entire learning ourselves. And I remember this point where someone said that, it's actually our legal duty to tell the students, regardless of age, when we come into the classroom, what it is they're supposed to learn. So we can't just throw material at them and then assess that and ask questions about it and give them scores and points and grades about it without first telling them, what is it actually that I'm, what did I think that you were supposed to be learning before? And so it actually says somewhere, at least in the Finnish law, that we have to present the learning goals and the learning objectives and the rubrics to the student, like before we even start. And I think that we're super bad at it. I can be very bad at it at some points, because you kind of forget, and then you start thinking about, well, how is the student supposed to know what I'm thinking about this whole thing? So I think that we teachers kind of sometimes like hide our own work. Because I have thoughts about this all the time. I think all the time about what is it they're supposed to be learning. And then the question is, am I telling them that? And so there's something in the communication in also creating the psychological security and the safe space to learn something.
But maybe you have to repeat it as well. I have experiences from having like distance courses, and although it's written there and it's on the first line on the menu and they can see it, somebody will still ask about it. So it's something that has to be repeated and built into the material, I think.
We previously talked a little bit about like designing for autonomy. What is that?
I've just recently analyzed some material that we had one-to-one iPad implementations in Finnish classrooms, and autonomy, beliefs about autonomy actually was a key thing to determine how teachers designed with the iPad, which is interesting. And I think if we talk about what autonomy is, it's a very abstract concept in a way, but I think in all curricula nowadays there is something written about making students autonomous, making them a lifelong learner, and so what we looked at in this study was first of all, from the classroom observations, how is the power and control in the classroom defined? How does the teacher design for power and control? And is it like you have desks in a row, or is it placed like you can work together, and like all the classroom setup will be like a frame for power and control. But it's not only that, it's also about the timing and the framing and the when and how and where you do something. Can you as a student decide that I want to sit out in the corridor and I want to work with my friends and I want to do this and this around the topic, not only what the teacher says. So how in what ways are you autonomous? Which kind of decisions can you make in relation to what the goal is? Or can you set the goal? Can I set the goal as a student, and that's even more autonomous.
Ooh, and that's why I like the Steiner approach to education, and feel like it's such an amazing thing when you have students kind of define their own goals and define their own learning, and and you're not only handing it to them. I think that us regular teachers have a hard time like implementing that, because we go like from one extreme to the other. So we go from entirely directing and controlling and having the power and telling people what to do, and they're doing it hopefully, and then being pissed off at the students who don't do it. But then if we hear about this or think about this, and we find it very romantic in a sense, like a romantic view of, oh, I wish that education was like that and my students were self-motivated and self-regulated and I could just, and so then we kind of just give them a headline. I remember like my own upper secondary, like one of the years was called a project year, and it was a lot of teachers throwing headlines at you, and you were supposed to go out and do the researching for it. I remember drinking a lot of Coca-Cola somewhere and not doing any research until the final minute, and I was a good student. And kind of remembering that was kind of handing over all the power and control, but not in essence providing any guidance or support or helping me realize this or helping me find how to work with this.
Yeah, but when I looked at the teacher interviews in relation to the classroom observations and the power and control clusters that we found, I could see that how the teachers talked about their beliefs about learning and how to design for it. You could see that I could find in the cluster analysis that those that talked about autonomy in a positive way, they were the ones designing for students' autonomy, while the one critical talking about, you know, their beliefs about learning were more that, well, they can't do anything by themselves. I have to be there and tell them this and this, and otherwise they won't do it. They designed for the teacher power. So it's all about your beliefs about something and what you think, how you think something should be. I have a great example. My kids have been in Montessori schools abroad when we lived there, and when we came back to Finland, Montessori schools is all about this autonomy also. They have set up, you know, different stations where they can choose what to do. So they can set their own goals, and then the frame of working is restricted in a way, but they can do it in their own process. Okay, they can choose the goal, but they can choose the frame, but they can choose the timing and all of it. They finish when they're done. So when we came back to Finland, my daughter was in preschool, and when we had this parent meeting, they were sitting wanting to ask me some questions. Then they said like this, that, well, we have a small problem with Frida. She's very nice student, but she never finishes. We have this schedule and we have to continue with something else. And she's just sitting there and in her own time and doing. And I started laughing because she was used to a different kind of, you know, autonomy. She had more power
about
she
her
had
own
power to choose
rhythm.
her own time and rhythm and create her own learning process in the way she needed to continue.
Yeah.
And that didn't fit in the Finnish system. We have this timing about, you know, 45-minute lecture and then we move on to something else and everybody has to do the same thing.
Yeah, or 75.
Yeah. So it's also about the culture, but also about the beliefs about how power and control,
how we learn in a sense,
how it should be divided. Yeah.
I've also, because we had a previous talk about this, and you were talking about co-regulation. And what does that mean then?
Well, that's all about the social dimension of well, I think for one, learning is a social thing, and it's about relationships. So when I learn something, if I sit alone, I've done this a lot as a researcher, sit alone, read some books. I don't actually know what I know before I talk to somebody and get the reflection and confirmation about, and then the thoughts start to develop in a whole other sense. So co-regulation is more about the regulation in relation to a learning process where you include other people.
Okay.
And you can divide this in social regulation, socially shared regulation, but the main thing is that it's about the process where you include others and how do you, in the best way, reach the goal. Because it's all about the goal setting in learning. You know, have a goal to go somewhere, you do the planning how to get there, you have the strategies how to move forward, and then you reflect on where you have gone. But this in relation to your, you know, previous knowledge and all of that, and the culture that you're in.
Yeah.
So I've also seen differences in when I looked at how people learn online, if they come from different cultures, they make different choices based on their beliefs about, you know, what is cheating in an online environment, what is collaboration in an online environment. So this is not clear. It's about actually having to define a new learning culture where these cross-cultural things comes in. If you've done a MOOCs course, for instance, you will have like 80,000 participants from all over the world. And
I remember my first MOOC course. I remember being very academic about it, and like studying very hard, and ordering the book that they were just recommending that you buy, and doing like this in a very kind of heartfelt sense. And there were, for each module, there were 9 to 10 videos that you watched in a row, with the longest subtext, or the producer, blah blah blah, like afterwards. I think out of 7-minute video, like the final titles were like 3 minutes, and you had to watch through them every single time before it actually registered you as having watched the movie. And so you watched those 9, and then you took a quiz. And the quiz was just a multiple choice, and actually very well structured and like this. But then there was this final bit where you got a question and you were supposed to write something about it. And what I didn't realize until I had done, I think, 3 out of, I think there were 9 modules, was that was voluntary. You didn't get any more or less points for it. And I remember being very academic about it and writing this long text with references and citations and sources and all of these things in it, and pressing submit. And as you press submit, you get to see everyone else's answer. And after you've done that 3 times and you realize that people are just throwing in there 3 sentences or 3 lines with, I found this interesting, oh, wasn't this great, or I found that part boring, or something, very, like, my opinion and what I feel about something, not so much as answering the actual question and using academic citations for it. I realized that I'm overworking this and I'm not getting any points for this.
Let me ask you, when was this MOOCs course?
It's not long ago, 2 years ago, I think.
Okay. Because MOOCs have also developed, and in the beginning maybe the instructions for how to write something or give feedback maybe wasn't really up to par.
Yeah.
Now, when last spring I took a few MOOCs courses myself, and I was very impressed by how they had developed, and in doing this peer feedback and having that built into the system, and sort of guiding the student how to reflect on the other person's writings, and giving instructions on what to look for, and I found it really good. So
Wow.
So like I said before, take MOOCs courses or online courses yourself, and
MOOC courses, by the way, massive open online course. There are also VOOCs, vocational open online courses, and then there are various types of MOOC courses. There's MOOC-C, there's MOOC-X, there's MOOC.
Yeah.
A lot of different ones.
But I want to go back to the co-regulation, because when you talk about what kind of new skills do students need in our new digital world, you can. There was this article in Vasabladet the other day about a woman writing her dissertation about how distance teams manage and how they are successful in the workplace. And I think this is a key skill that you will need in the future. You will have to be able to work together over a distance with other people somewhere, and
negotiate meaning,
about different things, collaborate and coordinate stuff, and all of that. So and that's all of this, co-regulation. How do I learn to work together with other people in an online environment? How do we set rules how to behave to each other? How do we determine who makes decisions, when to do stuff, and how to collaborate in different ways, and using tools for that? So I think digital in schools, yes, I think it's very important. And this is why, because you have to, in the future, learn how to collaborate through a distance. I'm very certain of it. And that's why I found her research very, very interesting, because she had found, I can't remember her name now, we can put that on the screen, but she had found that these teams at a distance, they often fail because there are so many obstacles in how to manage, to collaborate when you're maybe different cultures, different time zones, different, contexts.
Something that I as a teacher miss with most online tools is, of course, the possibility to give feedback orally or even visually orally. And so I've been working with a platform, like it's like a learning platform, just like Moodle or It's Learning or Canvas, or like whichever learning platform you use. That's called Shobi. And Shobi, in a sense, gives me the possibility, if you are sending me an essay, your essay is 5 pages long, just saying, I have the availability when I open your, it's like a chat, so you are kind of chatting back your information or whatever you want to say to me. And when I open your essay, I can kind of draw with a pen or like a stylus or write by hand. And then remembering that students with learning disabilities usually can't read handwritten stuff, you can do text bubbles. It's kind of like speech bubbles. I just press wherever on the page that I want to give a comment, my face appears and a bubble after it, and I can fill that with then written text. And the third part that I love the most is where I can give oral feedback. So I can go like, ooh, well done, Annika, right here. There's, however, some kind of a problem in the text here, because I think that you've missed a citation or you missed a source, giving a source for something. And then perhaps you could have changed the order of this and it would have become, like easily more understandable. And when I've worked with that, the teacher students that I've had that have been like the students on the platform, and I've been the teacher, say that, and this kind of gets me, my heart just went like, ooh, really? Grown-up people saying that for the first time ever, I understood that you didn't find me bad because I had made a mistake, because I could hear in your voice that you didn't dislike me because I had made a mistake. And that is just heartbreaking as a teacher.
So what you're saying is that since you could use your voice, that came through. But if you had written the feedback, it wouldn't have.
No, and I think that we teachers also are usually, and especially since I'm a language teacher as well, we're taught to become hypercritical, which means that we only find the bad parts. And we have to consciously remind ourselves to highlight the good parts and go, what is it, and explain to the students, what is it right here that you've done so excellently well? Because otherwise it will just become a long list of boo-hoo. So I can give a student like the top grade and still have the red pen go crazy on it. And especially when it's online and you become distanced from the student, then the student will not get to hear me going, ooh, well done, you. But they'll just see this was bad and this was wrong and this was bad and this was wrong.
Yeah. And that sort of makes me think about this research on mindsets and how...
Ooh, like the growth mindset?
Yeah, growth mindset. And so because it works both ways. Should we describe what this is also?
Yes, please do describe what it is also. I was just going to say, but I didn't want to interrupt you.
Yes, this research about growth mindsets versus fixed mindsets, where you're as a student having a growth mindset, you believe that your effort will make a difference. If I study hard, then I will succeed, and if I don't study hard, then I will fail. But if I have like a fixed mindset, if I fail, I think I'm a bad person. And that will create a lot of shame. So I might not even try, maybe, because I sort of choose the avoidance because I don't want to, lose my face. And and I think that works both ways when you talk about feedback. If it's how you give the feedback will enforce maybe like a fixed mindset or a growth mindset.
Ooh, they, by the way, measured this on, because feedback, the students are psychologically afraid of the ego death, which means that I, as a teacher, could tell you as a student something so bad that you would just psychologically die inside and not want to go on with life. So that's the psychological death in it. And interestingly enough, if you give feedback that's orally given or even visually orally, as in a video, the students they measured that they can take on and understand or kind of take in the feedback 43% more, because otherwise we'll have students, depending on the level, of course, that go, what grade did I get? And then just go, I don't want to look at the other stuff, and throw it in the garbage can. Or if it's on a file, they'll just not look at it. And so, but they were more inclined, 43% more inclined to actually listen to the feedback and take it on board. But I mean, it's a great responsibility that you have as a teacher.
And I think this will be helped if you talk a lot more about the learning process, because then you teach them how to view learning in a more constructive way. Not that it's a set, this is right, this is wrong, I'm bad because I got it wrong. It's more that I can learn how to change and develop and learn more, and failing is part of it. So also failing as a teacher in relation to digital tools for learning.
Oh God, I fail all the time.
That's also a process, and sometimes maybe your students know more about the digital tool than you do. So have them help you. Discuss the difference, discuss why you're doing something, have them figure out solutions where problems arise. So.
You talked about previously, before this, you talked about a questionnaire that you had at the end of like modules or a course, where you had the students talk about, how could I have learned better, or how could I? Talk some more about that. Tell us, what did you do and what did you ask and how did that work?
Well, my research has always been from the get-go regarding e-learning, having this discussion with my subjects about their learning process, because if you take self-regulated learning, it started earlier on from using just surveys, questionnaires to measure, like it was like a static thing. But actually self-regulation is always something dynamic in relation to the context, both digitally, socially, everything, your background, your prior knowledge, all of that. And so what I've done, I've used like stimulated recall interviews to watch what they have been doing and discussing their learning process after their session. So in that sense, I could see and get the information about the learning process firsthand in that sense. But more is interesting maybe was that they started to reflect on their learning process. Oh, why did I do like? Oh, wow! Look what I did, and that started this sort of reflection about, which you could see that was developing their own understanding of themselves as a learner. So the questionnaire that I had developed was like, I was very critical to these questionnaires, to use them and make quantitative studies about it. I mean, that has its place for certain, but from my research questions point of views, I wanted to have them reflect on these concepts and issues relating to their learning process. For instance, how did you find that this tool helped you collaborate? So I've used it both with teachers and students, and having them reflect on the learning process after a learning session to sort of start this reflection process and make them. And I think this should be a part of any kind of learning situation, especially when it's related to digital.
Yeah. I find that, like online learning, in a sense, becomes so much more interesting when you actually talk about it, like both before, during, and afterwards, but especially afterwards. And in your dissertation, you looked at companies like online or e-learning. What did you find there?
A lot of stuff. For instance, for one, how important emotions are for your choices you make for learning. So,
as a learner or as a teacher or both?
As a learner, in this study there were no teachers.
Okay.
It was only the self-paced e-learning
Okay.
course. So, but the emotions play such a big role for our meaning making and our goal setting and all of that. You talk about the metacognitive as I have to learn to see my own thinking process, but I am very much convinced that we also have to learn our meta-emotional awareness.
So
And
my thoughts about my feelings, or
Yes.
like how I see my feelings?
Yes, how I can become aware of my own emotions in relation to what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's all about self-awareness, and you will need that anywhere in life. So if you can create that in terms of designing something, an online course or something that makes them reflect on their emotional awareness in relation to what they're doing, you will create that process to develop, evolve, whatever.
Wow.
So I think that's very important.
Okay,
And-
I'm gonna ask you now a very tricky question,
Okay.
and you can go. Don't really know if I want to answer that one.
Okay. I get
If
the
you
point.
would design an online course now for us to take at this point, what would the ideal course look like?
I think there is no definite answer to that because it depends so much on who are the students, who are the teachers, what's the content, what's the context, what's the culture, all of that will influence. What's the goal? Is it in a industry context where you have to maybe have a pragmatic goal of I need this information now because I have to solve a problem in my real work. So that's you can't sort of frame it like that and say this is the perfect stuff.
She's
No.
trying not to answer the question.
No, I'm gonna. But what I think is everything we've been talking about that create connection with your students or make them create connections in between, create psychological safety that this is a learning process and we encourage you to have a growth mindset, to see your own growth mindset, so that you as a learner understand that it's okay to fail, it's okay to discuss something and expose myself. It doesn't matter. And like for instance, it was a really nice teacher that I interviewed, and this was a phenomenal way, I think, for this teacher to do this, that the teacher was talking about her own emotions in relation to this. So how vulnerable do I feel when I'm exposed here? And giving the permission for them, the students, to feel the same way. And it's okay, and we can talk about it. And when you talk about something, like Brené Brown says, shame is only there until you talk about it.
Yeah, it goes away then.
Yeah. So create an open atmosphere where we see each other and connect, and that's, I think, the key. Then it's of course all of this other design and constructing, according to what your brain can remember and organize and on all of that.
Yeah. Because I find it exceedingly difficult as a teacher, even though I'm an IT pedagogue and I do research on this and I think about these things all the time. I still find myself not being entirely sure about the choices I make as a teacher when I structure online courses, because sometimes the question is, how autonomous do I expect the students to be or want to be? For instance, in some of these examples, I have adult learners who are at work. They have like a regular work and they're doing the studies like on the side. Do I create group works then, where they have to work together and they're actually dependent on one another to hand in something? And is that then fair? I know that the learning will be better, but is it fair to them, since I know that they are placed all over in the country and their time constraints are real and tangible? And on the other hand, if I let them do all of this alone, will it then just become like a reading course? Is that what we're doing? And how can I then have them start reflecting on their learning and doing stuff like that? So yeah, very difficult choices.
But I think the key is what you said in the beginning when you started the question, that I always have this question, I feel insecure. And we will always do that because tools change, students change, and you will always have to re-question what you're doing. And that's part of being, a process designer as a teacher. You really have to evaluate all the choices you make all the time. But what a suggestion is, some research that I was fascinated by was by Bondi Stephanie, who created, she called it co-generative dialogue, and she had
having to think about this co-generative
dialogues with the students, and she created, and her colleagues created different, like they had Adobe Connect, I think, classes, and that was related to the content. But then they created sessions where they only talked about how it is to learn in this and how is this design supporting my learning needs. So they included the students in discussing and putting on the table, well, my needs are like this and this, and we could, do this and this, and having this open, honest discussion that the teacher doesn't know best, but in discussion with them makes it a collaborative process where they take responsibility on a whole lot of another level for the learning, creating relationships and relations and connections that will support the learning process on a broader sense than only discussing the needs. They will have easier to collaborate and all of that. So I think including them as part of that learning is not something, taboo or magical. It's something that we create together, and it's this sociocultural, idea about us together create knowledge.
Yeah.
We might not know where that leads us, but let's have fun while doing it and doing it, connect around it.
I once worked at a higher education institution where they wanted to kind of see what would happen if we created a course where we jointly worked on MOOCs. This may sound a little bit strange. What it was in reality was 5 students and 1 person from the staff and me as a teacher, where we talked about what is a MOOC, what are the benefits of it, what are some hypothetical drawbacks, where can you find these MOOCs? There are a lot of different platforms out there that offer MOOCs, and they're different in quality, and how do you know which one is good and which one is bad? If will you have any benefits from taking this one or not? And then we'll just do them together. And so we had one session where we talked about that, and the students got to start searching for MOOCs that they wanted to take. They signed up for one, and then we met 3 times throughout the process. And during that time, they got to present how far they'd gotten, what they'd found, how did they experience their first encounter and experience with a MOOC. and how was their learning going, and what did they find hard, and what did they find easy, and then some time left to them where they actually got to work on the MOOC, and they got to ask questions and talk amongst themselves, and then we had kind of it was a fourth final session as well, where we evaluated how that had gone, and a lot of them said that was kind of amazing in a sense, because the dropout rate for MOOCs is really, really high. It's around 90%. It's been at 93%, but I think it's dropped a little, which means that most people who sign up for a MOOC will just drop out. And in that sense, they said the social network that we formed and where they were, in a sense, pushed ahead. We had one student who, she kind of veered between, like she wanted to do one course first and the course wasn't really good, so she backed out of that one and entered 2 new ones, and that led to the spiral of, ooh, it's too much, I can't do all of this, and not really wanting to decide. So she didn't finish any one of her courses, but the other students and the staff member, who is also a part of this by his own volition, they all finished, and they said that they don't think that they might have finished if they hadn't gone to this physical course at the same time. But it was a weird meta course, I have to admit, as a teacher as well.
Sounds very interesting.
It was interesting, and I'm just super sad that we didn't do any research on it at all. But the sample was too small, 5 students. And 1 staff member. So.
And when you mentioned that, I also talk very positively about becoming a researcher yourself as a teacher, and collecting data and understanding what makes a difference for the learning process and maybe the collaboration process and all of that.
Because usually we don't know, and we don't really want to ask those questions because, what if we ask these questions and we find out that my teaching sucks?
But you need to know that as a teacher.
You see, but you need to know that as a teacher. But on the other hand, I mean, I usually say that psychologically being a teacher is quite difficult, because if you are, let's say that you're a carpenter, and if you build something, like what you've built is away from you. It's not you, and you have an easier time psychologically differentiating between that house is not me. It might be my little baby, but, it's not me, and this is me. But as teachers, we use ourselves as an instrument, which means that I'm psychologically all into my teaching, which means that I have a hard time. No one taught me during teaching education that how do I differentiate between, okay, this is me, but this is my work, when I use myself as an instrument.
So that's also self-awareness, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But psychologists are trained. You guys are trained to do this kind of, but this is my work and this is me. We don't get that training, which means that sometimes getting feedback on our teaching as well becomes way too personal, more personal than it should be.
But I think this also comes back to this relational competence as a teacher. And if we talk about digital and having this understanding and how this changes when you add a digital tool in the frame. And I think we will have to re-identify. I don't know if that's a word even.
We get what it means, yeah.
Yeah.
Identify again.
Yeah, whatever. Our learning culture, in a way, because of course it depends. It differs a lot if you have like digital tools in your classroom or if you're doing it at a distance. That differs a lot how you use the tools, but still it creates a difference in the relations and the connections you can make. So this is something we have to talk about, and that's also about self-awareness and how am I in this context? How can I express myself in the right way? How can I connect in the right way? And when I looked at how teachers talked about the distance setup, for instance, and how they could relate to the students, I could see that, you know, they had these ways of anticipating the learner needs beforehand and trying to design for it. But then there's also
I do that, yeah.
yeah, then there's also about being sensitive in action, you know, when it's going on. You have to be sensitive to pick up on students' needs, although you might not see them. And then you have to be able to be responsive so you can do something about it. For instance, I had this teacher who had one-to-one discussion with the student who was online and at a distance, and she could sense that this student is a little bit, you know, insecure now. So let's remove his face from the screen, so he's not so exposed, and that made it better.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
so you sort of, you know, sometimes it's good to have the face there, but maybe if a person really feel insecure about it, then it's better to take it away and create a connection where the safety is balanced.
Yeah.
So that's about being responsive in the moment, and both sensitive and responsive. So you might not have to be able to anticipate all the needs, but you have to still be responsive, although you don't have the usual tools, as you know, nonverbal language and
Yeah.
maybe even tone
Body
of voice.
language
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I have a very practical example of that. I've been working with a robot. It's an avatar that you're supposed to place in the classroom for long-term ill students or students that have social issues of various kinds, or learning disabilities or learning challenges that prevent them from being in the classroom the entire time. And so this robot sits in the classroom. It can look around, it can talk quietly to the neighbor, it can talk loudly so the entire class can hear. And then the student sits with a tablet or a smartphone in his own bed or in his own room and stuff like this. And my first question when I met this robot was, why doesn't it have like an interface? Because it just had two like LED lights for eyes. And I was like, why doesn't it have like a screen that I can see the student in? And the interesting answer that came was that the company who developed this robot, no isolation, let's not leave students alone, is the kind of idea there. They said that the first variant or version of that robot, it had like the face with the interface. So the content in the classroom is streaming constantly, and then the content from the student was also streaming constantly. But the feedback from the students was that if I'm long-term ill and I have cancer or leukemia or any type of like long-term disease, then I don't want to be exposed, because the students and the teacher, they are in a formal setting with, they are dressed up and they have their hair combed, and they have like choices and power of how they are presenting themselves, while I, in my hospital bed, perhaps don't have a choice on how I'm presenting myself. And also things that happen in my vicinity, that I need medication or that the doctors come in and stuff like that I can't really control, happens in my environment that does not happen in the other environment. And so they removed the face interface from overwhelming feedback from the students that they wanted to be more in control of their own setting and just take in what was in the classroom. That robot has the saddest button ever. I have a hard time talking about it because I usually want to cry a little. But on the tablet, there are very minimal controls. Like you can turn around by panning and looking around with your fingers, and then you can say that, okay, you want to like raise your hand, and then the head of the robot starts blinking. But the final button that's there, it's a sad face and a happy face. So if it's a happy face and I press it, it becomes a sad face. And when it's a sad face, the head of the robot turns bright blue. And that is a message to the teacher and the students in the classroom that I'm so tired or so ill that I'm here listening, but please don't make me participate or answer questions or take part in group sessions or stuff like that.
But that doesn't have to be sad. I mean, that's a safety
It is a safety choice,
Yeah.
and I mean it's also a safety choice in the sense that I, as a student, have more power and control over what happens to me.
And I can participate, but if
Yeah.
I'm too tired to be a part of
Yeah.
it, like.
It's just my empathy going,
Yeah, of course. You're such
they're
an empath."
bad. They're feeling bad, and I can't do
No.
anything to fix that.
You have to change the mindset.
Yeah.
They can still participate, although they don't have to be active.
Yeah.
And that's important. I think I've seen exactly the same thing in distance students.
Oh, really?
Yes, and the research I've done, and being like what the teachers talk about in having both distance students at the same time as co-located students, and how this creates this psychologically unsafe feeling in the students being exposed to somebody who they don't know who they are, maybe.
Yeah.
And they don't know what's happening, but their face is exposed. And so this is all about the inequality in relationships, like we talked about earlier, that if you have a classroom and the relationships are unequal, unequal, then that will create conflicts in the process.
Yeah.
So it's
And I guess as a teacher, you have to be open to that as well, and open to failing, and open to receiving feedback about that as well. And I think asking for feedback, because sometimes the students aren't aware of the fact that A, they can give feedback, B, that it's psychologically safe to give feedback. I won't punish you for giving me that feedback.
But then again, I must say, as a researcher, and what I've experienced from when interviewing teachers and students, for instance, about having both co-located and distance students at the same time, it's very, very risky, and you as a teacher, you have this orchestration of digital tools, people at a distance, people in your classroom, and content.
Yeah.
And
It makes a complex job even more complex.
it's a cognitive overload for anyone.
Yeah.
And even those teachers that are really technically able will have problems, and the technical stuff takes too long. And so I'm just asking that, why do you think that's a choice? Can't you do it in any other way that is better for the students and for you as a teacher? You don't have to, just because it's possible to have co-located students and distance students at the same time, you don't have to make that choice and design it that way, because I see that the inequality is in many sense much too negative to be good.
Yeah.
If you say it like that.
I had
Yeah.
this experience of being that one distance student with everyone else being on the site. And it wasn't really a student kind of situation. I was in this board, and the board met in a completely different city, and I was the one representative from my city. Everyone else was from there. So every month we had a meeting where I would sit alone in a room with like a video conference setup, and I felt like I, as a teacher, and I, as like an extrovert type of person, didn't have like the hardest time. I felt that there was this psychological gap every time I wanted to say something, and that I was in fact disturbing, and that you could tell also by the people there, because I mean I could see everyone, that every time I put my hand up, it was kind of an extra effort for everyone to go like, okay, so Johanna's over there, and we're here, and okay, what does she have to say now? And also the fact that a microphone like that was on their table and my table as well, and we always got coffee and cakes or sandwiches or something like that. And people on that side, like my single cup, I don't think cost that much of a trouble there, unless we had people there with a hearing aid, because that was really bad, because they then said that, ooh, would I mind not kind of making so much noise with my teacup? But when they sat amongst themselves and, you know, like the cups would kind of cling and clank and the glasses
it
and
could be the keyboards also.
the keyboards as well. And I couldn't hear. And I felt like now I'm an extrovert type and I'm used to kind of taking the floor and demanding that space and saying that, hey, I have something to say and whatever that is will have some kind of a difference. But what if you're not? What if you're that single student and you're introverted or you're not that type of person that you will just kind of volunteer and every time you become exposed?
Well, this is also about creating this new kind of culture of communicating, culture of collaborating and creating relationship. It's about including everybody in a way that you have to be aware of how the process is, and that the best way is to be on the other side sometimes. So you know,
I realized that somehow in that situation, some of us or one of us or the person with the who was the chairperson should have actually had a discussion about how will this work now? We have one participant and in order to make her feel welcome, this is how we do and or this is how we interact or this is something. But that discussion was never had and it made it really awkward in a sense.
Well, doesn't this define how difficult it is to sort of make everything go well?
Yes.
Because it could be just like a coffee cup on the table that, you know, makes the whole situation unbearable.
Yeah.
And if you don't know about that, and I know exactly what you're talking about, I have a lot of these meetings as well through Skype or Adobe Connect or something, and you just don't want to interrupt the process of flow that they have on the other side if you're alone on this side, and it's really, really difficult to sort of be on equal terms with everybody else.
And I think that on the side of the person who has the power, then the teacher, or in this like type the chairperson, or in your case a professor somewhere, or whoever is in charge of the meeting, should actually take into account that kind of inequality that exists in that type of situation and address it in some way so that the psychological safe space can be acquired.
And I think we have a very long way to go. Everybody has to learn this sort of relationship with the media and what it does to us and how we can sort of create a positive culture through it.
And so you think about now how it makes you feel that we are talking, you know, amongst ourselves and not looking into the camera all the time, and what happens when we do address you into the camera, because that is also something that does something to the person taking part in something like this.
Yes.
But we should go back to self-regulation. What was it originally that fascinated you so by self-regulation? Why did that become kind of your topic?
Well, since I had studied psychology, developmental psychology, and I moved to India. If we take this long story, I moved to India with my husband. And I said, I move with you as long as I get an internet connection, a computer, and we get married. We did all that. Anyway, so when I was at a distance, I realized, you know, how this could be you. I was a research student in developmental psychology. Then I changed into education because I found it so interesting, this learning at a distance and being, you know, with this tool that creates such immense opportunities to take courses, collaborate, communicate, and all of this. And when you're faced with something, you know, digital or a medium, and you sort of have to start to reflect on your own learning process as a researcher at least, and see and how do I manage. And when you have to manage something, that is about your self-regulation. You have to, you know, find how can I control this, how can I manipulate it to my benefit, how can I you know, change the context, change my own conceptions about it, my you know, mindset or whatever, and create this learning process in relation to the tools. And when I looked at the e-learning courses for the industry, that was like a design process. And of course, if somebody's self-paced in an e-learning environment, you have to design for their self-regulation. That sort of becomes the key, because if they cannot, learn how to make the right choices, then you fail as a designer of e-learning. So I mean, it was sort of an obvious choice in a way, but I've always, I think, been interested in self-regulation. I do a lot of yoga and in qigong and all of that, and that's all about creating that self-awareness and being self-regulated on a more personal level. And if you read self-regulated research, you will always find. And if you want to improve your self-awareness, you can do yoga, meditation, qigong. So, I mean, it's sort of my life.
Yeah. Oh, but that's really exciting. And I find that self-regulation is a not very much talked about subject within education, I find. Sometimes, I mean, the systemic parts of online learning, for instance, can be that teachers will receive pay for the exact same amount of hours that they would use in a kind of a course in a classroom, as to when they are holding a course online. And I find that it takes so many more hours. My department, or the project, the EU project that I was a part of in the 2009 was educating vocational teachers mostly online. I mean, there were some kind of meetings and sessions that they had in person, but then most of it was online. And our researchers then measured how many hours does a 5 study point course take in order to do a good job as a teacher on the kind of back end of the entire course. And the answer wasn't 40 that you get paid for, but 238. So for the 5 study point course, the teacher who gets to be the person who takes into account feeling socially connected with people and the students amongst themselves also, not only the student to the teacher, but the students amongst themselves, and taking into account like social connection and emotional factors and working with a more diverse way of doing it instead of just force feeding material down someone's throat. 238 hours of work for 5 study points.
But then, if you would look at that teacher in many years ahead, that
would be shorter.
Down,
yeah,
and you learn how to improve and sort of make it efficient and so. But I do believe that if you're implementing digital learning, you should really put that in the budget.
Yeah, I was just going to say, principals and future principals out there.
Oh yes, it's
just
not about
take it
saving
into
money.
account.
Digital learning is not about saving money. It's about doing it, creating a whole new learning culture, and that is a lot of work.
Yeah. Me as a consultant, when I'm out in the field and they ask for, like being able to videotape my lectures or something like that, I usually take like a larger sum of money and I give them a time period that they can only use my material for so and so long, because material also gets old. But in order to, because I think also that this is the same with the co-located students and the students that are at a distance. When you film lectures that happen like on the spot and you have a real audience that's on the site, when you film stuff like that, you forget the camera as well, which means that usually you'll talk to the students but ignore the camera that's standing off to the side, which means that you're not really there. And at the point where the student who gets to watch the recording looks at it, you're not there. You're not talking to that student. You're talking to other students. And that also does something for motivation.
Oh, yes.
Talk about motivation in relation to kind of self-regulated learning and self-regulation.
Well, I think
Big subject, sorry.
Yeah, big subject. I think motivation is all about meaning making in a sense, and creating this authentic learning experience where you can feel connected as a student. Then of course you can teach strategies of how to set small goals and get motivated to challenge yourself in different ways, like all this gamification of learning is tapping into, and I think that's very good. I think more of that. I like it. Like for instance, this student that I talked about that went back to see that, oh, I got check marks on 4 or 5, and then I know I have this. That's like also a meta motivational strategy to go back and see, so I can motivate myself to finish.
Yeah.
If I didn't know how much I have left, it might be 3 times more, and then I get so tired that I just give up.
I usually tell my teachers as well that remember when you create material online, and if you just keep putting in the material and you're not categorizing it for your students at all, but stuff that's must know, stuff that's should know, and stuff that's good to know are all intermingled, and they all lie in this kind of random pile of files or links. That creates such a mess in students' head that they will not even participate. They will not kind of take part of whatever it is that you're doing if you haven't categorized it.
So that's all about the constructing, organizing material so your brain can organize it inside, and connection to the motivation and the willingness to continue. I mean, the overview is.
How many online courses have you given up when you've taken them as a student yourself? Have you given up any?
I mean, I'm a curious researcher, so I go into a lot of MOOCs and see how they're built, and then
not take them.
I mean, so I no, that's why I also think this 92% of the dropouts is really a number that says a lot of other stuff than that people just give up.
Yeah.
It's not about that. It's since they're open and online, you're in a subject, like I tell my students, I tell my children, go into the subject and search for courses online. You can find, if you have to read a book about a psychology subject or something, you can find that author giving a speech somewhere, and you can listen to the person talking, and that's also about creating a connection to a subject, to see a person, get a face, and become involved in a different, more connected way, in a sense. So I do that a lot, so I could not answer your question. I have no idea.
So the answer is a lot.
Yeah, but I've also finished a lot of MOOCs and online courses. I took
and
like a 2-year.
And you said that the best one was one of the ones where you actually gave each other, you gave your fellow students feedback?
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Scientifically, when you have the possibility that the teacher gives feedback and or your fellow students give you feedback, then the teacher's feedback is weighted 8 times more than the student feedback. And so it's interesting, which means that you have a great responsibility as a teacher, that when you do give feedback, that you either give it to everyone, or that you're very clear that I'm going to give you feedback just 2 times during this entire semester, or something like that. So they don't feel like, because what they measured was that if you and we have like our hypothetical teacher now, and we have this assignment, and you and I both write something and we send it to the teacher, and the teacher gives me feedback, you would think that if I get feedback, then my level of motivation would be the one that goes, ooh, yay, and yours would stay the same as it was before. But when you know that I got feedback and you didn't, that will lower your motivation a lot. And so if it's not pre-agreed upon, then that will become an inequality problem again.
I think if I analyze myself and my own reaction to this peer feedback process, it was perhaps because it was structured in a way that the goals of the tasks became really clear. So by giving feedback to others, you repeated the essence of the goals of the task.
Ooh,
And
of
when
course.
you did that, you sort of reflected on both what you had written yourself and what the other student had written. So you sort of get this variation of how you can perform and in relation to very specific task goals. So maybe that was what I liked most. It wasn't about, writing long answers or feedback to the other person. It was more about looking at the variation of how to perform something in relation to the task goals.
Yeah, and you also said that they had a very excellent matrix, as in, if this is the learning goal, the hypothetical learning goal is that the student is supposed to be able to ride a bike afterwards, then it was very kind of segmented that, for the grade so and so, you have to be able to do this, and for like all the grades then. But did you also grade or did you just comment?
No, we graded.
Oh, you graded as well.
Yes,
Ooh.
so you had specific, task levels.
Yep.
Or goal levels, or what did you say? And yeah, so you gave percentage how much they had managed to get that in
Wow.
the task. And yeah, and of course, and once I got only 98%, and I got really, I want to do this over. So I had the opportunity to do it all over again.
Oh, you did? So it was kind of like a process teaching as well?
Yeah,
or
so you
process learning?
you could do it over the task and get the better results.
And you were disappointed with 98%, of course.
Yes, but because I think this is a very critical thing with e-learning as well. It's not that some should be at this level, some should be at this, and this percentage should get 100%. Everybody should be able to get 100%, and the system should be designed so each student can find, well, here are some black spots that I need to cover. And so the feedback is designed to specifically guide you to go where you lack some knowledge.
Ooh, that is nice.
Yeah. So I think everybody should get 100%.
Yeah. That's also a variant of MOOC-C, and MOOC-C is the type of MOOC, if I'm not entirely mistaken now, MOOC-C is the type of MOOC that actually, it's not all that, but it changes the content depending on what you've learned. So it's more like gamified in a sense, where you get to level up if you do, if you reach a certain stage of knowledge, but you don't get to level up, and then also that the content changes. I don't know if you've tried any of those language learning apps.
No, I haven't.
Oh, and they're excellent, some of them, and where you're like, when you've answered the same like word, what does it mean, or you've got to translate it back enough times, it sort of recognizes that now you know this word, so we won't throw it at you so many times, and then it kind of fades away in the background. But sometime again, it will come up and it will just test, and that's the kind of gamification or MOOC also, where your actual learning, it's more constructivist in a sense, because it that's why the C as well, constructivism. Because it actually changes the content depending on how well you've gotten.
So it's based on like the metadata.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really nice.
Yes, I would want more of those out there, because that will make it more motivating in a sense, which means that you won't get the same word that you already know for 100th time or something like that, but that your learning will actually evolve, and you'll notice as a student as well that I evolved.
Yeah, my daughter has a lot of apps. She's learning Russian through an app. And now we went to Croatia, and she downloaded an app for Croatian, and she started to learn Croatian. So I think it's really nice that you can see that people started using these in a very dynamic way. Well, now I'm here, I can just download this one, and I sort of catch some phrases and get that. So languages, I like it.
Wow. Our time is drawing to a close, so we'll have some fun. I'm just going to have to check and see, because we've skipped over 1,000 questions, but we've answered so many much more.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
It's a word that we need to acknowledge when we talk about self-regulation, and
Yeah.
that's the word agency.
Ooh, talk about agency.
Agency is the ability that you create when you have it's the empowerment of you as a learner. So the agency is sort of the core. You want to have agency to be able to deal with the problems. It's sort of coping mechanisms. So self-regulation is about building agency to kind of adapt to the environment whichever you're in.
Yeah.
So as a teacher then is how to empower the students to find their own agency, and that's also about autonomy.
Yeah.
Giving them the tools to become autonomous and having agency to deal with the stuff they meet.
Wow. As a kind of finishing off of this little discussion or interview that we've had, some reflection points for you now. How have you seen self-regulation in your own work? Have you learned at some point how to view your own learning? Do you know why you avoid certain tasks and why you throw yourself at other tasks and overdo them even? And if not, you now as a teacher, how can you help your students to get to know your own learning, regardless of if the teaching is vocational in nature or if it's academic in nature? It doesn't really matter what subject you have. So think about these questions and write a comment below. We'll have a little forum or a link for you where you can add your thoughts about self-regulation. But other than that, I want to thank my esteemed colleague Annika Wiklund-Engblom, still a postdoc researcher in at Umeå University in Sweden. And my name is Johanna Björkell, and signing off for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.